Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Itchon, COO, and with me, as always, is Tim Anaya, Vice President of Marketing and Communications. So, Tim, summer is right around the corner. You've got vacation plans coming up. So where are you off to?
When you hear this, I'll be in two places at once. So this year has been, a bit of a challenging year. My mom has been battling cancer. And so I told her when she battled through well and is in remission. And I said, okay, where do you want to go for your post-cancer trip? Wherever you want to go, we're going to go. And I was hoping, well, maybe she'd want to go to Hawaii or somewhere tropical like that. No, of all places, she wanted to go to Disneyland. So I have spent a ridiculous amount of money to book us a wonderful trip to Disneyland. So when you hear this, picture me in a long line of some sort with a million children. But I think it will be fun to walk around and see everything. I can't remember the last time I was there for that. And, I'm certainly I'm more looking forward to all the restaurants and the eating and drinking. That's what I'm looking forward to. But so that is that's my big vacation plan.
Well, Tim, you can't go wrong with the happiest place on earth, right?
That's right. That's right. And when you work in politics all the time, you need a little happiness every now and then.
Well, I just came back from Lourdes, France, and I'm with the Order of Malta, and we right around May, we take our very sick people onto a pilgrimage to the shrine of Our Lady of Lourdes. And so I've just got back from the pilgrimage, but I'm afraid I don't have any vacation plans. I was so busy the first half of the year that it all kind of got away from me. So I've always been down on staycations, but that's starting to look very appealing right now.
Well, especially when you're here, there, and everywhere, the adage, right? You need a vacation from your vacation. Staying at home sounds good when you have gone on a major trek or you're on one plane after the other.
So let's talk a little politics here. So this is a moment we've all been waiting for. I've been waiting for anyway. The Biden-Trump debate rematch is now on the books, everybody. And I'm actually excited about this, Tim. So prior to Trump running for president, I rarely watched the debates. I thought they were pretty boring and canned and dull. But Donald Trump, to me, turned the debates around and made them really great entertainment. So I kind of miss him. But right now, there's, of course, a lot of criticism that Trump's team got snookered by the Biden team, agreeing to have CNN air the first debate in June, hosted by Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, both known for their Trump bashing, no pun intended. But give us your take, Tim.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I would argue he was hosed. And, it shows that, Trump's hallmark, right, is that he goes on instinct, he goes off the cuff. Well, sometimes strategy matters, and it matters here with the debates. Now, he in his mind thinks Joe Biden is the weakest candidate and I beat him before. And I don't care what the format is. I just want to get on the stage with him and I will win the debate just by Biden looking so weak. Well, when you talk like that, and he's certainly pounding his chest since he agreed to these debates, well, all Biden has to do is show up and not fall flat on his face. And he's done pretty well. Certainly, quote, exceeded expectations, which they'll be saying in the spin room. And if you look at the formatting of the debate, Biden got all that he wanted. So first of all, he didn't want a crowd. So both of these debates and the vice presidential debate, which is going to be on CBS News sometime in July or August, they'll be in a studio with no crowd. And Trump, of course, plays off the crowd. So that's one disadvantage. Number two, Biden doesn't want to have to face RFK Jr. on the stage. And the criteria they set forth for these debates, pretty clear RFK isn't going to meet either of these debates. And then the third thing is, as you were just saying, with the moderators, Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, they're smart reporters, they're tough, but they're liberals, especially Jake Tapper. And their whole thing, right, how it's going to play. Everything for Donald Trump is going to be January 6th. What about the trial? That's a lie, Mr. President. Here's the fact check things. All of those things are going to be there. It's going to be, I think to the casual viewer, everybody against Trump. Now, maybe Trump gets some advantage out of that, but is Trump really going to get to do his thing and be as entertaining when you have basically the whole debate is about constraining him and, quote, following the rules and listen to the moderator, and the moderator needs to have control? Well, I think these media moderators have gotten out of control in recent debates. Remember the infamous one with Candy Crowley and Mitt Romney and Obama. It was like Candy Crowley was a contestant on the stage debating the candidates. And of course, as we've learned in hindsight, Mitt Romney was right and Obama and Candy Crowley were wrong. So I feel like we need less moderator, less, all the little rules. Just let them stand up there and say what they're going to say. And as if you think you're going to control Donald Trump, even with these constraints, they're going to have another thing coming to them, I think.
Well, Tim, I totally agree with you. But, what would you advise Trump? I think I would advise him to avoid the name calling, avoid belittling Biden, try not to be a bully. I think he should try to contrast himself by, being quick and articulate and energetic and in command of the issues. And the more you can contrast himself as vibrant and in charge against Biden, who may, as we think is going to come up weak and feeble. I think that would I think he should look at his target audience, which is, of course, not the MAGA crowd, but that crowd that's not sure of Biden's ability to continue as president. I think that's the audience that he's got to look to.
That's exactly right. The election is going to be won or lost by who the double negatives vote for. And the double negatives are the people who don't like them both. And so you have a chance in the debate to make real headway with those people. Trump has to do a couple things. So number one, he has to appeal to those people. Number two, he needs to show energy, right? That's the main contrast. I'm energy. Yeah, we're the same age, but I'm so much more vibrant and energetic. He has to do that. And number three, remind people of the record that we like. Growing the economy. Everybody got rich. We didn't have foreign entanglement problems. Have some nostalgia, what he did for Asian Americans and African Americans and Hispanic Americans. All of that. He should talk about those things. They shouldn't, if this debate is like the last debate between the two, where he was interrupting him all the time, or if this debate is all about, I really won the election and all of those kind of crazy, and Hunter Biden and all these kind of crazy conspiracy theories, he's going to lose the debates. I would argue Donald Trump lost the 2020 election because he looked out of control in the first debate last time. He can't have a performance like that this time, especially with a lot of people who are leaning to him because Biden has been so ineffective, but who aren't sold. And they could just as easily flip to Biden or sit on their hands.
So let's move on to what's happening in your backyard, the Capitol. Let's talk about some of the major bills that were held back. Californians know we've got a big budget deficit in our hands, as much as 70 billion, depending on who's counting. So let's go over some of the bills the Appropriations Committee decided to hold back or bring forward, starting with single payer.
Yes, it's the biggest bill for PRI. It's the bill our president and CEO, Sally Pipes, is most interested in. It was the push again to create a government-run healthcare system with no competition from the private sector, an over $400 billion price tag. Liberals in their heart love it, but as Speaker Rivas on down said, I don't know how you pay for it when we have a $73 billion deficit, and that won out in the end, and that bill is dead for the year.
And your favorite, Tim, this is AB 2751, the right to ignore your boss. That was held back.
That's right. And I guess I'm not super surprised about that one because, it is an unworkable bill as they presented it. There are a lot of things they didn't think through about how you would implement that. So yes, that particular bill is dead for the year, but that bill is what I like to call a headline seeker. And he certainly got a lot of headlines in California and around the world from that bill. He, meaning Assemblyman Matt Haney, the author of the bill. So I predict they're going to tinker with that bill and it'll be coming back next session.
Well, yeah, I mean, common sense prevailed this time, but I think it was more out of self-interest than anything else. I mean, what politician wouldn't want to call their staff at all hours? And so I guess staffers can still expect to get the midnight call.
That's right.
Okay, next bill, the unemployment for striking workers. That moved forward. That doesn't surprise me.
No, I mean, this is the legislature is union dominated territory. They want to expand unemployment to striking workers. This is Senate Bill 1116. Our Wayne Weingarten has one of his spending watch analyses of that bill, and he documents the huge costs if that were to be implemented. But also, it encourages strikes and more of them. And it also encourages longer strikes when there are work shortages. So it's terrible for our economy. The direct cost of the bill will be terrible, but also all the people who work in the affected industries who aren't striking but do business with the industries being struck, they're hurt by these massive strikes too. Look at the Hollywood strikes of last year. So that's moving forward. We'll see, how that goes in the coming weeks. But yeah, that's a bad bill.
Yes, it's absolutely terrible. It's such an insult to taxpayers and hardworking people. It's unbelievable that they would even consider such a bill. Next step looks like this climate change bill that assesses fees on fossil fuel companies due to the damage they supposedly created for the environment.
And this is another one where Wayne has a spending watch analysis of this bill as well, which you can read at pacificresearch.org. And this is one of those where we have a lot of details as far as here's what we want to do rhetorically, but it's unclear still. Well, what does it mean? What is the tax? Who would pay it? How would it be administered? So I think the devil it's a bad idea to begin with, but the devil really is in the details there. So, that one's moving forward. Again, that one doesn't surprise me, but the impact of that could be even more damaging as we see how as the details are filled in on that proposal.
Yeah, they think they're punishing companies, but they are actually punishing people, especially the working poor who have to drive long hours, long distances to their workplace. It's unfortunate because gas prices will just go up.
That's right. And the cost of goods and people's job opportunities could be threatened as well.
And finally, the reparations bill to create another layer of bureaucracy to determine who's going to be eligible for reparations, even though there's no program available yet, if there ever will be one. But we already have to hire people who will tell us what to do when we actually do have a bill. Unbelievable.
That's right. And they're going to go through the farce of actually determining, these are government bureaucrats who are going to determine, are you really eligible for reparations? And they're also going to determine, are you eligible for a full share of reparations payments or a partial share? We can't make these things up, but that bill is moving forward.
All right. Anything else going on, Tim? Any other bills coming up that you're watching?
Well, another interesting bill, there was the brouhaha over the kind of woke energy charges that were charging people for electricity based on their income. And the Public Utilities Commission just approved what the charges will be for the major utility companies in the state. So some Democrats in the Assembly realized that's a bad bill. We don't want to be dealt with that political hot potato. So they had a bill that would have added a sunset date on the charge, which is a $24 per electric bill charge. And that bill failed this week in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. So I predict that won't be the last of efforts to try to limit or put the brakes on or stop these charges, but certainly a step backward on that effort. Speaker Rivas was not supportive of this at all as well. So, it's pretty clear that the leadership, they talk about we're for the working poor and we want to make sure we help their cost of living, but yet we continue to enact these types of charges. A lot of them are green mandates that impose a huge cost of living on those who can ill afford to pay them.
Thanks so much, Tim. Great job on following these bills. So let's move on to our guest speaker. We've got it's going to be quite long. Well, not too long. For our listeners who missed the Baroness Thatcher Dinner in Newport Beach, our keynote speaker was economist Steve Moore, and we were able to put that on a podcast and record his talk. So it's pretty rare that we're able to record a keynote address, and we're able to do it this time. So listeners, don't think you'll be able to hear all of our keynote speakers appears on the podcast. So come to our dinners. This is a rare occurrence. But of course, Steve Moore doesn't need any introduction. He was one of the key architects of President Trump's tax cuts and his economic plan. He worked for multiple presidents, including Ronald Reagan. And that's actually when I met him, when he was in the Council of Economic Advisors. And most viewers know him, or most Fox listeners or watchers know him as a commentator on Fox. So here's Steve Moore. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And we'll be back next week.
We'll get back to Next Round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week.
It is a wonderful privilege and probably pleasure to be here. And by the way, I don't know how many of you saw, did you get the Wall Street Journal app on your phone? I just came across the transom just a few minutes ago that they are going to rename the BATF. You guys heard about this? Yeah, Biden is going to rename it the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, Gas Cars, Air Conditioning, Gas Cars. So thank you for coming out tonight, and I want to have some fun with you tonight and talk a little bit about politics, talk a little bit about the economy. Sally, when you called me and asked me if I could come, I was just so thrilled. I'm a huge fan of Pacific Research Institute. So for those of you who are supporting PRI, thank you. They make a huge difference. This is a tough state, California. We just did I work with a group called ALEC, and we do a report every year. We've done it for 17 years now, where we rate the states in terms of their economic environment. And the report literally just came out this morning. And we rank the states from 1 to 50 in terms of the best economic climate and the worst. And anybody want to guess which state came out number one? Utah. And by the way, Utah has come out number one 16 of the 17 years. But anybody want to guess what state was number 50? California. Congratulations, folks, California. And so it's always been a contest between California and New York, and California came out number 50 this year. So you got a lot of work to do. It's just a shame, by the way. I woke up this morning staying at this wonderful hotel here. Had this beautiful view, gorgeous day, 70 degrees, sunny, wonderful people. I mean, how do you screw this up? Really, and how do you screw it up? It is just amazing to me. And, one time I debated Paul Krugman. Do any of you know who Paul Krugman is? He's sort of the most influential left-wing economist in the country, and he's in the New York Times all the time. And so at that time, this was about 8 or 9 years ago, and at that time I was the chief economics writer for the Wall Street Journal, and he was the chief economics writer for the New York Times. So this group had us debate each other. And one of my big things is looking at states and what's happening. The big story in America today that nobody wants to talk about is, and I really think this is the biggest thing in America, is the red states are just bleeding the blue states dry. And this is happening day after day. It's accelerating. And so I remember debating Paul Krugman, and I said, Paul, all these states like California and my home state, and your home state, John Cox of Illinois, and New York and New Jersey, they do all the things you tell them to do. They raise their minimum wage. They have very generous welfare benefits. They're forced union states, tax the rich, soak the rich, blah, blah, blah. And yet, and I said, Paul, I'm confused because everybody's leaving those states. I thought these were going to be workers' paradise, but everybody's leaving. And kind of had him, and he got upset. He said, Steve, you just don't understand. I mean, he's got the Nobel Prize. He teaches at MIT, and he said, you don't understand with your pea-sized brain, how this stuff works. He said, there's a very simple explanation why everybody's leaving for South Carolina and Florida and Texas and so on. He said it's because of the weather. And, by the way, that's not a complete, Florida has nice weather and so on. And I really did, I hit him really below the belt pretty hard. And I said, well, that's a really interesting observation, Paul. And I know I don't teach at MIT and I don't have a Nobel Prize in economics, but she said, I'm confused. I said, well, if people are leaving for the weather, why are people leaving San Diego for Houston? Because nobody leaves San Diego for Houston. He had no response to that. But it's sad to me that a great state like California that has really been the leader of technology and so many of the great trends in America has become so disabled because of progressive policies. And this is actually one of our warnings. I am, in addition to what Sally, thank you for the nice introduction. I'm also, Donald Trump announced last week that the 3 economists that he's going to be working with us on this campaign, you're going to love this. Larry Kudlow, Art Laffer, and Steve Moore. So, and so I'm very proud of that. And we are going to, and by the way, I have to say this, and I've worked with him for 8 years now. He doesn't really need our help. I mean, when you think about it, it really isn't that tough a choice. You have a guy in Joe Biden who spent his whole career in politics. By the way, do you know Joe Biden has never had a job? I mean, he brags about this. He gave a speech the other day saying, I've never earned a paycheck. He bragged about that. And he said, I've never worked for a private company. I don't even know what payroll is. And, you have him. And then you've got Donald Trump, who's built great things, great businesses. He is a businessman. But we are going to be working with them. And by the way, I just have to say, how many of you know Trump personally? Raise your hand. Some of you do. He is, I admire him greatly. And people really, he is like Reagan. Charles, and I think you'll appreciate this, and Clark, you will. There are some similarities between Reagan and Trump. Now, there are some profound differences, but two of the big similarities between Reagan and Trump are that, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, Clark, but like Reagan was always underestimated by his political opponents, right? And to their detriment, they said, oh, wow, Reagan's never going to be president of the United States. And same thing with Donald Trump. They underestimate him and his appeal to the American people. And the other thing about Reagan and Trump that I think is so interesting, they both love people. Trump loves people. He loves being around people. He loves the adulation. And I really consider him a friend. He's always been really, really good to me, personally. And even, I don't know if you know the story, but I was nominated to be on the Federal Reserve Board by President Trump back in, 2018. And it got to be a brutal process. I remember the first day it was announced, I was on the front page of the New York Times, Steve Moore, who hates women, he hates blacks, he hates Hispanics, blah, blah, blah. And it went on and on and on. They were the New York Times was calling, and by the way, it was kind of flattering that they cared that much. That was going to be, I didn't even know what the Federal Reserve, he said, do you want to be on the Federal Reserve Board? I said, okay. I mean, you don't say no to the president, right? I said, sure. It was hardly my dream job. And I remember they'll get a kick out of this. They called a bunch of the women, that I had known over the years because, they wanted to find dirt on me. And so this one woman I dated in college, I don't even know how they tracked her down, but they tracked her down. And Lori called me, and she said, Steve, I just got a call from the New York Times. I hadn't talked to her in like 15 years, but we had been friendly. And she said, I said, oh, God, Lori, what did she say? He said, he asked me, the reporter asked me, did Steve ever make any untoward advances towards you? And Lori, bless her heart, she said, I wish. So I got off the hook on that. But anyway, the reason I bring that whole incident up was that it was brutal. And I have skeletons in my closet, and they spilled out all over the place. And Trump the only person who stuck by me that whole process was Trump. And so I kept calling him saying, I think I probably should get out of this. It's looking ugly and I don't want to embarrass you. And Trump would like, no, you stay in that fight. You're the right person for this job. I mean, I felt like, a blood again, in a boxing match, the 11th round, I got blood coming, get back in the ring. But anyway, I mean, that's the kind of guy he is. He will be loyal to you if you are loyal to him. And by the way, he has a great, sense of humor. I mean, he, about a week ago, we were at Mar-a-Lago with the president, and there were about 7 or 8 of us, thank you, who were having dinner with them. And he was very relaxed. He was in a very good mood. And we were just kind of sitting down, rum kick, shooting the breeze. And this one gentleman at the table was drinking his wine. And Trump turned to him and said, hey, Joe, he said, do you know I don't drink? And, we were kind of stunned by that. And Joe was a little embarrassed. And he said, oh, yes, Mr. President, I've heard that about you. By the way, how many of you knew that Trump doesn't drink? I'd been around him. It never occurred to me that I'd never seen him drink. And so it was a little kind of a tense moment. He said, Joe, he goes, I don't drink. And then he said, Joe, can you imagine me if I drank? So he has a great sense of humor about him. This is going to be a monumentally important. I mean, we always say this every election, but this is good versus evil. This is one thing I respect about Trump is he knows that I disagree with him on tariffs and things like that, but he still wants to have people around with different opinions. And so I really believe this is going to be one of those races that's going to be back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That we were talking at the dinner table that the thing to keep an eye on. Don't look at the polls. Look at the betting markets. The betting markets are what are the predictors. And Trump has had a lead for the last 2 months, but in the last couple of weeks, Biden is now slightly in the lead in the betting markets. And so it's going to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Biden had a terrible day today because of the inflation numbers. Inflation is still a big, big problem with the economy. I don't know why people in Wall Street were surprised by that. If you look at commodity prices, if you look what's happening with gold, if you look what's happening just with gasoline at the pump, it's clear that inflation is still a big problem for people. And so this is, if Biden wins a second term, can you imagine that, by the way, 4 more years of this guy? I mean, it's hard to imagine that, and they are deadly serious about the things they want to do with their radical climate change agenda. I have to give Biden some credit. He, unlike most Democrats who run for president, they try to talk moderate, right, Clark, and then they get in and but to his credit, Biden isn't doing that. He's saying, you elect me, and we're going to turn this country so far to the left, you're not going to recognize it. I mean, he's telling us, listen to his State of the Union speech. It was like anti-Reagan, right? We're going to raise taxes on the rich. We're going to spend another $2 trillion. We're going to keep spending and borrowing until, and everybody's going to get free things. Free things. 30 million people are going to get their student loans forgiven. By the way, how is it that Donald Trump is the threat to democracy when Joe Biden says he's going to do $30 million relief on their what is the term they call it? Forgiveness on these loans, when the Supreme Court has said very clearly, you do not have the right to do this, right? The Supreme Court made its declaration on this. And by the way, as I read the Constitution, the spending power rests with the Congress, with Congress, not with the presidency. So he's defying the will of the Supreme Court. He's violating Article 5 of the Constitution, and he's basically saying, by the way, he's even saying, the court's trying to stop me from doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And Trump is the one who is the threat to our democracy and our Constitution. So there's a lot at stake here. So I want to just take a few minutes, if I could. And by the way, the presentation I'm going to show you, I'll go through this pretty quickly, is exactly the same when I met with Trump last week. These are some of the same slides I showed him, so you can kind of see where we're going with this. So let's start with the blind economics calamity. And so this is the big problem for Biden. Is inflation is a curse. I think, Clark, that one of the major reasons that Reagan beat Carter was people were so upset about high prices, and the runaway inflation we had. And you can see the blue pillars are the change in prices under Biden, and the red pillars are the change in prices under Trump. By the way, Biden tried to make the claim today that the reason we have this runaway inflation is because of Trump. And does anybody know what the Wayne? You cannot answer this because I know you know. But does anybody know what the inflation rate was the month that Trump left office? 1.6%. 1.6%. We were below the Fed's target for inflation. In 18 months, Biden somehow, I don't know how he did it. It's pretty incredible that you could screw things up that quickly. In 18 months, we went from a 1.6% inflation rate to 9.2%. So this is the albatross around Joe Biden's neck, and people aren't buying the fact that inflation is going away, and they're not buying it because it isn't.
We'll get back to our great guest in just a moment. But first, are you following PRI on Facebook? By following PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, that's all one word, you'll be the first to read free market ideas from PRI's terrific team of scholars on all the hot issues like education freedom, single-payer healthcare, crime, homelessness, green mandates like the ban on natural gas appliances, and more. Plus, when you follow PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, you'll be the first to know when tickets go on sale for PRI's must-attend luncheons, dinners, and galas across the state. And you'll be first in line to secure your spot to hear great speakers like Michael Schellenberger, Gordon Chang, Steve Hilton, and many more. So go to facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute and follow PRI today so you'll be the first to know.
Can we all agree that we can never again allow the government to shut down our businesses? Never again should we let them shut down our schools. Never again should we allow them to shut down our churches. I believe that we have a new report that just came out on the consequences of what happened with COVID. What we would conclude in our report, we had all the top people, Sally. We had Scott Atlas. We had Steve Hanke, one of the top economists, the top public health officials. We just looked back and looked at what happened. The lockdown of our economy, let me put it very simply. Every single thing, with very few exceptions, every single step that the government took in response to COVID was the wrong thing to do. And it had unbelievably negative effects that will affect the country for decades to come. And the worst, by far, the most unforgivable error was shutting down our schools. And our children are going to suffer for decades. We estimate $5 trillion of lost wages for the next generation because of that lost year to year and a half of schooling. And so the other thing that we did with COVID was we bankrupted the country. We spent, and by the way, Trump, I'm a Trump guy. Trump was in on this, and we spent huge amounts of money. And by the way, when I see Trump, I always tell him, Mr. President, you know what the biggest mistake, you made was, and he said, hiring Jerome Powell, and I said, no, that was a mistake, but that was not your biggest mistake. What do you think his biggest mistake was? He should have fired Anthony Fauci on day one. Anthony Fauci is a villain. He belongs in jail. By the way, there's a new report out by Rand Paul that shows that Anthony Fauci flat out lied to Congress about what was going on with China, and he knew about it, and he lied. He belongs in jail. My alma mater, I don't know if you mentioned that I went to University of Illinois, but my alma mater, University of Illinois, just gave Anthony Fauci their Hero of the Year award. I mean, can you imagine that? And by the way, if you walk into the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., which is part of the Smithsonian. I don't know if you've ever been to the National Portrait Gallery, but there was a big conference there. You walk in, the first giant portrait you see is Anthony Fauci. He has become the patron saint of the left. But anyway, so we spent all of this money, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, and every single penny of that was paid for by borrowing and by printing money. Now, so people say, gee, where did the inflation come from? This is like sixth grade economics. If you borrow and spend and print $6 trillion, you're going to have inflation. It's as certain as the sun rising in the east and setting in the west that you're going to have that. So there's the money that you have. And then For the first time in history, in 2020, the United States became a socialist country. Our government was actually more than half of our entire economy during 2020, during COVID. And by the way, we have not returned to pre-COVID level of spending. That's why we're borrowing $1.5 trillion to $2 trillion. What the left is very good at is basically ratcheting up spending every time you have a crisis, and that's what happened here. So we come in. So Biden comes in, and by the way, when Biden came into office, this is part of his narrative, and we have to correct him on this, and we have to educate Americans. COVID was basically over when Biden came in. In fact, the economic growth rate, we were in a ferocious recovery when Biden came in. The economy had grown in the second half of 2020 by about 6 or 7%. And so we didn't need any more money at that point. We needed to stop spending money. But, there's a guy named Rahm Emanuel who was, famous chief of staff for President Bill Clinton. And he said something, very profound. He said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And what the left did, it's important you understand this, the left used COVID as an excuse to spend money on green energy programs and welfare expansions and every dingbat left-wing idea they'd had for 30 years. Now they have the excuse to do it. So when they passed the so-called American Recovery Act, that had nothing to do with COVID. That was all just to spend money on things that they'd always wanted to that they didn't have the ability to. And so you can see it kept escalating and escalating and escalating. That's build that better with the now. This is an important chart. So the lesson of this chart, if you look at this is the national debt as a share of our GDP. And I love this chart because if you start at the beginning, you see that little red bump at the beginning. That was the Revolutionary War when, our government had to borrow a lot of money to finance the Revolutionary War so we could win our independence. And then after the war was over, what happened to the debt? It came down. And in fact, by the 1820s or so, we actually had no debt. And then you can see we had the Civil War, and so the debt went way up. And then after the Civil War, what did we do? We paid down that debt. Same thing with World War I, then we paid it down. Great Depression, World War II, huge amounts of borrowing, unprecedented in history. What happened over the course of the next 30 years is we paid down the debt. What is unusual and especially sinister and diabolical about Joe Biden is this is the first time that when a crisis was over, we in a rational world, we'd be reducing our debt right now, right? We wouldn't be racking up trillions of dollars debt. We should be reducing it. The pandemic is over, and look at that. That's where we're headed with our debt. Now, I'm not a debt, phobiac. Debt can have, it depends on what you're borrowing for, but this isn't going for anything useful or anything that's going to build the industrial capacity of the United States. It's just social programs and green energy and so on. And so that's what's dangerous about this. We're not in a recession. We're not in a pandemic. And yet we've got the Biden and the Democrats borrowing like never before. So this is the heart of the matter. This is the thing that I showed Trump that he almost leaped out of his chair when he saw this. So we're going to use this statistic over and over and over in the campaign. And it's very simple. When Donald Trump was president, we saw the biggest increase in real take-home household income in history. So the average family, even taking into account, this is just through 2019, it doesn't count the pandemic year, we saw a $6,500 increase in real take-home pay adjusted for inflation for families. That's a gigantic increase in 3 years. What does that tell you? Trumponomics worked. It worked like crazy. Now, what is the same? By the way, if you add 2020 to this, it comes down. We lost about $1,000 per family. So it's still about a $6,000 gain under Trump's presidency. That's a big number. Under Biden, now this isn't completely up to date. It's about 6 months old. But under Biden, the average family has lost about $2,000 to $3,000. So the reason you keep seeing these polls that show Americans keep saying we're worse off than I was 4 years ago. By the way, do you remember, Clark, that was the famous question. How many of you remember in this room when Reagan debated Carter? Any of you remember that? That was like the first thing I ever paid attention to. I was like an 18-year-old kid, and that was the first thing in politics ever. I watched that debate, and I'll never forget, at the end of that debate, Reagan looked straight into the camera, asked 150 million Americans watching that night, I have one question for you, my fellow Americans. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And Reagan won, 42 states or something like that in a landslide. That's the same question we're going to ask. We want this to be about the economy. We want it to be about, are you better off 4 years ago? Because the vast majority of Americans say no because they're not better off. So I just thought this was kind of a fun one since a lot of us in this room are economists. The black line is the inflation rate over the first 2 years of Biden. You see those dotted lines? Those were the predictions of inflation by all the Wall Street economists and the Congressional Budget Office and all these, wise men who said, by the way, this is great. In I think it was the summer of 2021, there were 12 Nobel Prize economists, Paul Krugman being one of them, who signed a letter in the New York Times saying, don't worry, Biden's policies will not cause inflation. They did. Can you believe that? Don't you think maybe they should probably send their PhDs back and say, we have no idea what we're talking about? Could they possibly have been more wrong? So that's the inflation story. One of the things to really worry about, look, I'm proud of what we did on our tax bill, and we want to make that tax bill permanent. These were the policies that, we cut the corporate rate, we cut the blah, blah, blah. Now, here's what Biden wants to do. And this is scare the bejesus out of you folks. And that should all Americans. If he wants to increase the corporate rate to 28%. He wants to raise the small business tax rate to 40%. He wants to raise the payroll tax on high-income individuals. He wants to nearly double the capital gains tax, and he wants to have a death tax that would go up to 40%. Now, if you take all these taxes, you know this. Like if you're a stock investor, you pay the corporate tax, right? That's taken right out of your earnings right from the start. And then you have to pay a dividend tax or a capital gains tax. So what we calculated that this would basically raise the tax on investment to over 60%. Nobody is going to invest in the United States with a tax rate like that. If you tax something, you get less of it, right? This would destroy the investment environment of the United States. It is a truly diabolical idea, and yet this is the plan. I'm not making this up. This isn't Biden's plan. We're proud of the fact, and this is Reaganomics. This is our laugher. You see the brown line? Those are the tax rates in the United States, and you can see when Reagan came in. You remember this, Clark? The highest tax rate was 70%, and we brought it all the way down to 28%. And it's jumped up and down, and you see at the tail end there that we Trump cut the rate. Notice that the green line is the share of taxes paid by the rich. Every time we cut tax rates, tax revenues have gone up and the economy's been improved. Is this complicated? I mean, it's not complicated. In fact, under Trump, the same thing. Today, the richest 1% pay 46% of the income tax. And Biden's saying they're not paying enough tax. So we're going to take that on. This is the chart that I showed Trump in my first meeting with him back in late 2015. That black dotted line was the corporate tax rate that we had, for 40 years before Trump came in. Those blue pillars are the tax rates of all the other countries that we compete with. And you can see what's going on here for the last 40 years. All these other countries were doing Reaganomics. They were cutting their tax rates to steal jobs from the United States. It got to the point where we were like at a 20% disadvantage over the rest of the world. And I showed Trump this, and I'll never forget. He said, Steve, that's like a Head Start program for every country that we compete with. And we said, Larry Kudlow and I were in this meeting with them, and we said, that's why at that time we called him Donald, he wasn't president yet. We said, we proposed that you cut the corporate tax rate to 20%. And I'll never forget this. He looks at us and he says, Steve, I don't want to cut the corporate tax rate to 20%. I want to cut it to 15%. And that was pretty amazing because that was the first time anybody got to the right of Larry Kudlow and I on cutting taxes. We said, if you want a 15% tax rate, we'll do it. We didn't get 15%, but we did 20%. And by the way, what happened as a consequence of that is we just sucked capital in from the rest of the world. It was like a magnet. So we brought in about $1 trillion from the rest of the world. It was a huge success, and Biden wants to reverse it. I'm talking too long, but I just want to make sure this is one of the most important charts in this whole presentation. So the green line there, this is the energy chart. That green line you see that's going up, that's U.S. energy, oil and gas production. And so you can see around 2007, around 2008, we were producing about 3.5 to 4 million barrels a day of oil. And then something really, really big happened. And what was that? It's called the shale oil and gas revolution. And it changed everything. It basically, almost overnight, we had like 4 times more oil and gas than we thought we had, because we finally cracked the code. And this was just American ingenuity. They figured out how you could get at all this shale oil. And so look at the green line. We quadrupled our output. At the end of the Trump administration, we were producing 13 million barrels a day. By the way, if you had asked anybody, even people in the industry, do you think it's possible that we're going to triple our oil output in the next decade? No one. If you had said that, you would have been seen as a lunatic. But we did, because of this incredible technology, horizontal drilling and fracking and so on. Now, so that's a cool story. And if you look at the very tip of that green line, you can see that for the first time in any of our lifetimes, the United States became the #1 producer of oil and gas in the world. That's a pretty cool thing, right? I mean, to be #1 in the world. So we had the commanding heights. And I remember, again, when we talked to Trump about this originally, we said, you know, we think you can, you know, this was 2016, we think in 4 years you can make the United States energy independent. And I'll never forget, he said, Steve, I don't want America to be energy dependent. I want America to be energy dominant. And guess what? We became dominant. We were out producing Saudi Arabia and Russia. Now, that's the pretty picture, right? That's a lovely picture. Now, you see that green line that's going straight down? That, I'm not making this up. That is the Biden energy plan. Now, I get asked a lot this question, Sally, because I give a lot of talks around the country to groups. How many of you think what Biden is doing is intentional? I mean, do you think they're really trying to destroy the country? Are they trying to burn down the village so they can rebuild it? Because how would you else explain why you would do something that's sinister to our country? I mean, why would you want to surrender? Energy is the master resource. The country that has control of energy. By the way, how many of you think that Russia would have gone into Ukraine if Trump had been president? There's no way. How many of you think that Hamas would have had the money to fire those rockets at Israel? It's all being financed with petrodollars. So this isn't just an economic issue, it's a national security issue. That's their plan. How many of you have heard of something called net zero? Any of you have heard of that? This is the agenda of the left. They want to take the United States to zero fossil fuels. Now, we get today something like 75% of our energy from fossil fuels, and they want to take that to zero. They really think you can run a $26 trillion industrial economy on windmills. These people are la-la land. These are frightening. Will destroy the American economy if you do that. And I guarantee you, if Biden is reelected, this radical green agenda will be at the very top of their wish list of policies. But I love this one. Trump loved this one. We're shutting down our coal plants. Look at China. Every 3 weeks they're building a new China. Is there anybody in this room who actually thinks that President Xi cares about climate change? He doesn't care about climate change. They care about taking over the world. And, you know, you get, what's his name? Who was the climate guy that they had? Kerry. You know, I got an agreement from the Chinese. They're going to stop producing, you know, and they're laughing. You know, Trump used to say they're laughing behind their back. Well, they were. So anyway, obviously China doesn't care about climate change. They're the biggest polluter in the world. And we're going to shut down our oil and gas and coal. And, of course, they're going to take over from us. I'll just mention one or two more quick things, and I'll stop. So this is what I was talking about in the beginning, that this is it. This is what's going on. This country is being redrawn. You know, California, if you keep pace with the number of people that are leaving this state, you lost 3 million people in just the last 5 years. If that pace continues, California could lose 4 congressional seats. You know, that may or may not be a good thing, but I mean, you know, just think about that. I mean, I don't know if you think it's a good thing or not here, but look at this. I mean, California's lost 2.5 million people. California, 2 million just over the last few years. And these trends are accelerating. And look at the big winners, Texas, Florida, Tennessee. By the way, what do Texas, Florida, and Tennessee have in common? No income tax. You think this stuff doesn't matter? It matters a whole hell of a lot. And then here's your governor. Will be enough electricity for all Californians after everybody leaves to Florida. That'll work. I think I'm gonna make this last point, and then I'll stop, if I may, Sally. This is the median income of the U.S. families in 2021, the most recent data, and look at the ethnic groups that are doing the best in the United States. Japanese American, Filipino Americans, Japanese Americans, Thai Americans, Vietnamese Americans. They have higher incomes than whites do. Now, how could that possibly be the case? How could a country that's systemically racist have Asians doing so well? And by the way, the other big success story in the United States today is what's happening with Hispanic Americans. Now, they're still below whites, but they're catching up. Hispanics are doing very well in this country today. Now, the real tragedy is Black Americans. They're not making the kind of progress that we'd like to see. But how can we be a systemically racist country when you see those kind of results? And many of those people, by the way, that are coming in, they're right off the boat. You're not going to meet anybody who's more pro-immigration than I am, but they have to come in legally. Biden he's completely undermined the support for our immigration system. So I'm going to stop there.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.